Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law Section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law Section. My name is John Roberti, and today's topic is, how do we do better? Increasing opportunities for women in economic expert roles. Certainly, we are seeing more women in the profession, more women playing key roles in the antitrust world. But I think there's still a long way to go. As we look at the rankings of women litigators, as we look at who is testifying in cases, in many cases you are seeing the same old, usually people who look alike, usually male. Well, today we have a guest who's going to talk to us about some of the things that maybe we can do different so that we can allow women, particularly, to be in more prominent, in this particular case, testifying expert roles. My host today is Anora Wang. Hi, Anora.
Hi, John.
Anora, what are we doing today?
We're going to talk about how to increase opportunities for women in economic expert roles.
Yeah, testifying economic experts are critical parts of antitrust litigations. I think, we could talk about them in the context of agency investigations. Economists play important roles. Usually that's a little more informal, but when you get to a trial, or even pre-trial, and you have an expert who's going to testify by deposition, that is a very, very key role for a party that's presenting its case. Why is this topic important? Why are we talking about it today?
It's absolutely critical. And I say this not just as a woman, but also as a reasonably ambitious young professional. I would count myself ambitious and fortunate to have seen some women role models even before entering the profession as an antitrust attorney. But I have to say, I think there should be more opportunities leading to top roles, first chairs, celebrated experts for women, and maybe also for people uniquely diverse in their own ways. Okay,
who's our guest?
Our guest today, Dr. Anora, is a principal economist at Amazon and a leader within the ABA Antitrust section. She's currently serving as the associate editor of the Antitrust Law Journal and a co-chair of the section's initiative called Diversity Advanced. Anora has more than a decade of antitrust experience gained from both the public and private sectors, including her previous roles at the Federal Trade Commission and prior to that to economic consulting firms based in Washington, D.C. And even before that, Anora was in academia for a little bit. After getting her PhD in economics from MIT, she was once a full-time professor at Georgetown University teaching courses such as applied microeconomics and industrial organizations. Tracking her career path as an accomplished economist leading to expert roles, we hope to get a unique perspective to the profession from many different angles.
All right, well, let's bring her in. Anora, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Anora, it's so great to have you today. And then, as I said, you have a very rich and successful career path and background. Hopefully, you can educate us, not just as you would usually do, educate attorneys on economics, but also educate us about the profession of economists as well. Perhaps let's let people know there are actually different economists out there. If I may use the word species, can I say how many species of economists do work in the field of antitrust?
You may certainly use the word species. Economists are, I believe, their own species, and then there may be like varieties there. So there's two ways to think about it. One is sort of how do economists get into antitrust, right? And that is either through PhD programs or straight out of undergraduate degrees, specializing in economics usually, or finance or something related, or they may do something in between, like a master's degree in some field of economics. Typically, there is no core requirement for a specialization in any of these roles or with any of these backgrounds. But you would find usually, people who enter antitrust to have backgrounds in what we would call applied microeconomics or microeconomic theory, which is basically is the kind of field that will help you think about how individuals or firms make decisions and the impact of those decisions. So that's, for obvious reasons, that's critical to understanding antitrust. You would not have, for example, macroeconomists typically entering antitrust, although if you had somebody who was looking to really change, they might. But typically, macroeconomists are motivated by different interests. So you would usually find somebody with microeconomics background.
Yep. And we usually hear of IO, which is short for industrial organizations, and labor economists. I think those are somewhat in a majority, and perhaps there are other trainings or disciplines within the subfield of economics that's going to become useful as the field is expanding. So in terms of skill sets, I would like to say when I see an impressive economist, I think of Liam Neeson saying, I have a very particular set of skills that I have acquired over a very long career. I do very bad impersonation. John,
I'm just wondering, when did Liam Neeson say that?
I'm not doing a very good impression. But the point is that there is a particular set of skills that's required from economists. What are those? What are the core skills?
So I would put them into different buckets, right? And so I would say, first and foremost, you need the analytical and technical skills because ultimately, even though you're trying to distill all this information for a more generalist audience, you need to start with the basics and then build up your models and know how to work with data, how to interpret them, the deficiencies of other people's models and such things. And so you do need a fair degree of analytical and technical proficiency to be able to do well. But beyond that, I think that what sets apart antitrust economics from maybe other careers, including academic careers, is that you really should ideally be someone who enjoys the cross-disciplinary element, the fact that there's intersection of law and economics, that you might, for example, be talking to businesses about how they think about their business strategies and not just sort of sitting in isolation and kind of writing your models like in that way. So you really have to enjoy the intersection between economics and other things. It helps if you like working with lawyers, and it helps if you're able to explain fairly complex ideas to lawyers in language that they not only understand but are willing to listen to, because they'll otherwise, not want to deal with you if you're kind of going into very serious economist mumbo jumbo, basically. And so you have to be able to distill things and be able to be clear. It helps if you're a good writer also, because often you're doing a lot of writing in this job. And then also, I think what really helps is just a little bit of like this, what I call the storytelling element, right? So an academic economist might, read a newspaper article and say, hey, this is a really cool idea for a research project. But what you really want from an antitrust economist is obviously to be in touch with the news and stuff, but also be able to build the full story, not just based on data, the initial idea and data, but also you're looking at documents, you're looking at testimony, and you're basically trying to make sure that the story is consistent all the way through, combining different sources of evidence and kind of telling the big picture story, stepping back from that.
It's a lot about taking a complicated thing and making it simple.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I'd love to circle back to what you said. You have to be one who loves to work, who loves working with attorney. I think that's a prerequisite working in the field of antitrust. And also, I don't know what do you say after you hang up the phone, but while on the call, you will need to distill information and explain that. And as you said, a storytelling element into it. But let's break up the roles a little bit. As a consultant, or as an expert witness, or as an in-house expert, I think the skills do differ a little bit, right? What would be the forefront requirement for example, as a consultant? What do you do if you're just consulting and you're not testifying? Is that different than testifying?
I mean, it is quite different. I mean, in terms of, most testifying experts who are not coming from academia, but are what we would call homegrown industry, experts who've built their careers in the industry, either through an agency or in a consulting firm. I think most of them, start off doing the same things, right? And then the question is, do you want to become a testifying expert? Did you have the opportunities to become a testifying expert? I think it goes without saying that if you're a testifying expert, your communication skills have to be particularly good, right? So your writing and your storytelling and your certainly your speaking skills and ability to communicate to lawyers and all of that and a judge have to be particularly good. You have to have the interest to take on that degree of stress. A lot of people don't want to take on that degree of stress. Because it is stressful to have your name on a report and be responsible for it and be deposed. So those, there is some personality. I feel like they're soft skills, but just because they're called soft doesn't mean they're not important. They're super important to distinguish people who go on to become and want to become testifying experts as opposed to being consultants. But I think most of them will start out in consulting roles and build their careers up. And a lot of that is the same set of skills. You have to be able to, all the things I listed before, but you have to be able to work on teams. You have to be able to work with tight deadlines. Sometimes you don't have a completely open book, right? Somebody comes to you with a case and it's clear in consulting that this is a client and you've committed to work for the client and you have to do that advocacy. So you have to be flexible. So all of those things, these are things that they don't teach you in graduate school, where they're just teaching you to write papers that you come up with and you are pretty much have an open-ended kind of slate in front of you. So those are all transitions I think people have to make when they go into consulting.
It's interesting because there are a lot of skills like that they don't teach us in law school either. Right. I mean, we learn the basics of where how the law works and all, but you rarely, you have some classes where you're taught advocacy, but in large part, you learn how to be an effective advocate by, for lack of a better word, apprenticing with more senior lawyers who mentor. How much of that is in play in the economist world?
The advocacy element,
or the learning
also
through
the apprenticeship.
The learning through watching, let's say.
A lot, it is a lot. It is a lot because, like I said, you are going out of graduate school and you're dropping into, say, a consulting firm, and you've never seen the world this way. If anything, graduate school teaches you the opposite, which is don't let anybody else tell you what the answer is. Don't let anybody else tell you what analyses you should do, right? And all of a sudden, you're working in a consulting firm in a pretty hierarchical structure, which is hierarchical by design because it recognizes that the people who have just come out of graduate school don't have the full set of skills yet, to deal with clients and to deal with the advocacy element. So a lot of it is learning and watching. I mean, I certainly benefited from that a lot, both learning how to advocate, but also learning how to not go too far in the other direction and advocate too much. So I went through a whole transition when I was in consulting of kind of learning both ways.
Let's take one step back. I think you mentioned something really interesting, like, testifying expert is actually really different than just doing analysis, crunching the numbers. And then some would say that would be one limitation to why we're seeing fewer women experts testifying. Do you agree? Is that or is it a myth?
So I like to start when I think about issues involving, diversity or lack thereof. I often take several steps back, and instead of thinking about the issue as innate kind of personality differences, I think a little bit about kind of the challenges and the obstacles and the lack or presence of inclusion, because I think all of those things ultimately make people who they are, more so than their gender in terms of these kinds of personality differences, right? And so I think if there's a ton of evidence out there, for example, in fields involving math and science, and econ is one of them, right? There is a huge amount of evidence that women feel deterred from taking on careers that involve technical work from a very early age, right? And it's almost impossible to quantify for what each year or each day or each week of somebody's life where they've felt, questioned in their choices, what that does to their confidence, what that does to how assertively they may present themselves in certain situations. So I like to think of it as kind of a much bigger problem, which has less to do with whether you want a certain degree of stress or confrontation or risk or whatever in your life today, and much more to do with, the nurture process, basically, which got you to this job where you might have to make one of these two choices.
Yeah, I think the nurture aspect is definitely very, very important. And it goes back to what we just discussed about apprenticeship. If you enter a profession and you see very few women, sitting in first chair leading the team, and then you would think that might not be as many opportunities for you. And there might not be as many people who are potentially willing and able to mentor you, right? I think that could be a problem. But the things are changing, isn't that right?
So things are changing, and I'll say, what in economics, I think in the legal profession, because I follow this as part of my job, part of my role in Diversity Advance. But I think in the legal profession, although challenges remain, I feel like the numbers are a lot better in some kind of absolute sense when you look at the proportion of men versus women, and also the progress has been faster, even if there's much left to be done. In economics, one of the startling facts that people outside the profession may not know is that right now about 30% of PhD classes are women. So only 30% of women in any given year. In any given year, the PhD students are 30% women only. And the numbers for other minorities, such as African Americans, is something like 5% or in that range. And that the two other accompanying facts that I'll tell you is that 30% number has been stagnant at that 30% level for a very long time, for decades. So unlike in other professions, including STEM, where you've seen increases, you've basically not seen much progress. And this is not just a PhD problem. This is not just a PhD program problem. This problem starts in undergraduate degrees. So when you look at the proportion of women in undergraduate classes who are majoring in economics, it's about 30% too. So you can see that it's a problem that's not only persists over time, but in terms of scope of where it starts really early.
Very important statistics. Thinking about the legal profession, in many law school classes, and I don't have the statistics, but I'm doing this a little bit anecdotally, I think it's probably closer to 50-50 men and women in law school classes. And that's great. That's much better than it was, for sure. But what you're not seeing is we're not seeing enough progress in terms of women becoming partners and women becoming lead lawyers, women being ranked as top lawyers in the field. And it leads me to think that there are structural issues that we have to contend with as well. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are very significant structural issues, and I think much of this it's been played out in the front pages or some page, whatever pages mean in the online world today, of the New York Times and the Washington Post, which have all covered these issues of lack of diversity in the economics profession. So now I'm stepping back and talking about economics as a whole, not even talking about antitrust. And there's like issues with co-authorships and who gets rewarded when you co-author papers. Like it turns out that women may get less credit when they co-author than men. In terms of the tenure system, in terms of anecdotal evidence on harassment and just satisfaction in their jobs. And just a couple of days ago, there was a New York Times article about, the seminar culture in economics. So women are disproportionately asked, difficult questions, and usually by men in the audience. So there's been a lot of attention to this problem. And I think the profession is waking up and doing something about it at both the global level, but also at individual firms and universities and things like this.
Yeah. Let's talk about the environment a little bit. Like, you've been in the private sector and public sector and also in academia for a little bit. Is there, do you see a difference, or is like, I may be biased. I think I probably think like in the academia, things would be slightly better. Is that right? Or in the private sector, it would be slightly harsher. I'm not sure. Do you see a difference?
So I can only tell you in terms of my experience, because it's hard to compare them, globally for everybody. I'll say that it's all different. They're all different places, right? And they are facing different internal and external pressures, right? Consulting firms have they do a lot of teamwork. So they do need people who feel like they belong on teams. They need to retain people who learn the process and get really good with dealing with clients. So there's retention needs that they are particularly conscious of. They face external pressure from clients like law firms who want more diversity. And so there's a lot, it's a different setup. It's more hierarchical. And so inclusion matters more because you need to have face time with the people who matter. But it has a lot more pressures that make it change, make it responsive to challenges like this. I think government agencies, for example, are less hierarchical. Everyone is their own person and does a lot of, especially in economics, where you are often the only economist on a case team in the agencies. But so it's less hierarchical. So you have that sense of who you are on a team. But it is also has almost no external pressures to change. Right? I mean, there's no client involvement, and there's not much teamwork, which means basically you're not really interacting with other people as much, and so a lot of the interactions are happening in other spaces like hallway conversations and informal lunches, where lack of inclusion issues can be particularly bad, right? And so they're all different, and academia is somewhere out there in that agency space and probably has even fewer checks from the outside. So.
What you're saying is undoubtedly right. I also wonder if we in the antitrust world aren't part of the problem. And just to be provocative, look, I think there's a tendency to hire the same. You have a comfort level. You hire the same people over and over, and if those same people look a certain way, here we are perpetuating the problem. What should we be thinking about that differently? And how can antitrust lawyers find good testifiers? How do we give folks an opportunity? Have you given some thought to that?
Yes, I think the best thing that I've heard, because again, I do a lot of snooping around about this now in my role as co-chair of Diversity Advance. And the best thing I've heard that's been most effective is that basically the client, which is the law firm, or in some cases it may directly be the legal department that's hiring the economist, says, we want diversity on your teams. You may not immediately find the expert because they just haven't invested in women enough to have them be at that stage. But you say you want more diversity on your team, they will probably tell you there's a pipeline problem in economics. We're trying. We only have we have a supply problem and all of that. And the best thing I've heard is basically a heartless kind of rule that someone told me about, which is they say, we don't care. We want the diversity. You go figure out how to get that. It's not our job to tell you who to hire and how to plan your long-term pipeline and all of that. And so, I mean, it has to be realistic. You can't ask for like a 70% women-oriented team in a firm that doesn't even have that many women. So it has to be realistic, but I think making those demands and making it clear that that's a priority will do wonders.
There are milestones, I think, like 30%, 50%, and then certain things that, that's demand coming from the client, and then, client then to law firm to economist consultants. Those should be celebrated. Those are, I think, a conscientious effort that has been made that leading to some sort of increase of roles for women. Other than that, what other efforts have you seen being made?
Yeah, there are. So the ABA has been a great sponsor of all kinds of projects that are aimed towards increasing diversity, including towards women. There's a great series that's going on, which is called the Bar None series, which is a 3-part series that begins in February, and then there are sessions in April and May. Each session takes on a different aspect of encouraging and inspiring women to take on lead litigation and lead expert roles, and also focusing really also on the connection between women attorneys and women economists working together to mutual success. And so that's, one initiative. There's, other initiatives going on at the ABA where we're trying to find mentors and bring in econ ambassadors from universities who are still students and integrate them with the section, have them kind of play some roles in the section, but also meet people who are specialists in antitrust antitrust, get them kind of introduced to it from a practitioner view so that they may be more inclined to join the profession when they're at that stage. So there's a whole bunch of different programs going on at the ABA level.
So what you're talking about is so critical because I'm not really a trial lawyer, although I have done it from time to time. What I will tell you is that I'm pretty sure that jury pools are about half women, right? And I'm pretty sure that there are a very large number of female judges. And if you go in with a team that does not look like America, people notice that. The other thing I'll say is that my sense is we talked at the very beginning about whether any of this is innate. I got to tell you, I think some of the best teachers I've ever had have been women. Probably most of the best teachers I've ever had have been women. And isn't that what a testifying economist is really doing? Is she's teaching the case to a judge or a jury.
Right.
I have a follow-up, and this would be the last substantive question coming from me. That is, I think you're right. We're not saying women are superior or women are definitely more advanced or driven in some way. We're just saying that the optimal level of diversity and inclusion is not what we're seeing today. And then there is room for more. And then there is evidence, hard evidence, soft evidence. There is evidence and observations from real life that testify to the fact that we want more, and there is utility to be gained from that. Could you tell us a little bit more about the evidence of having greater diversity and inclusion would improve the profession and achieve a higher satisfaction, perhaps from the clients?
So yes, I mean the evidence is there's a lot of evidence on women's preferences over policy dimensions, without getting into why, and again, not getting into, what exactly drives the preference. But there is a lot of evidence suggesting that women, when you look at women versus men economists, even focusing on just economists, their views on policies can vary systematically by gender. And in particular, there are studies that show that women tend to have more faith in the role of government, in fighting climate change, in all kinds of labor and taxation policies. There are systematic differences between men and women. So just if you look at that fact alone, without thinking about why, it suggests that if you bring more women into, say, an agency or the workforce, you might have emphasis on different outcomes, right? So that's immediately one obvious way. There's also other evidence from outside of, economists' sphere, which shows that when you have women in local government, you increase quotas for women serving in local governments, or women being given subsidies as opposed to the head of the household, which is often men, you find that they make different choices and they make different decisions. And often, the studies show, currently the vast bulk of the studies show that women will make more investments in, children's health or overall population's health and stuff like this. So you definitely see differences in behavior, whatever the cause of that might be. I think, as I've said before, inclusion is a big part of diversity, or of diverse and inclusive workforce, and inclusion should not be automatically assumed. You have to work hard at it. Just because you hire a few more diverse people doesn't mean they come in and are automatically empowered. It's a harder concept to measure, so there's less evidence that's satisfactory to, say, an economist who wants to see the data. But I think even from my own experience and that of others that I've talked to, I have personally felt most productive and happy and invested in job environments where there's more people who either look like me or more people who are supportive of people who look like me. And so, and that's the case for many other people I know who are minorities or women. And so I do think it's undoubtedly the case that you'll see a more cohesive and happier work culture and more productive work culture, more innovative work culture if you bring in more diverse people.
I think that's been proven by studies that for sure that you can point to. And look, the thing that I think we should be hopeful about is that the demand side here is going to support trying to improve diversity. I do believe that that it's going to become I just don't think you can stand up in front of a jury with a team that doesn't look diverse and have any chance of thinking you're going to win. So I think that I think as the society evolves, I think the demand for a more diverse teams, including testifiers, is going to increase. And you're the economist, but if you have a demand, hopefully the supply increases to meet that.
Right.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Taking a step back, what advice would you give to a young economist who wants to do what you do?
I think it would be, this is very cliched, but it's very also true and consistent with choices that I have made. So I can say this with confidence, which is, I think it would be to just keep an open mind and explore as much as possible. So there's always this voice, when you're nervous, and this can happen especially with women and minorities for all the reasons we've discussed, there's often a voice going off in your head when you have the chance to do something new. It could be a networking opportunity, or it could be a new career opportunity or a new job or something major like that, right? And you have this voice saying, oh, is this really meant for me? I'm probably not supposed to go for this, or, why bother, or such a huge change, I'm not going to do it, right? And the fact is that if you don't do it, you will never know whether you would have liked it and whether it will lead to something really good for you in the long term, right? Or even in the immediate short term. And I think, there's obviously a degree, and some people are, for example, some people are introverted and they don't want to keep changing jobs in the way certainly I have done in my career. They like to form their, workplace, they like to belong to workplace cultures for a long time and get to know people, settle in and all of that. And I'm not suggesting that those people should break out and, do something completely drastic. But I think kind of being open-minded and taking even the little opportunities to just do something different, even if it's taking some kind of a training course or participating in some kind of initiative like a women's network initiative that somebody told you about. I think those are all really helpful and get you to meet more people and just learn more about yourself, and may lead to greater things.
All right. And now shifting gears again, tell us something interesting about yourself that we wouldn't know if we only knew you professionally.
So I think, I would say that the most interesting my thing about me is my completely overwhelming passion for food. So I am, I absolutely hate pretentious food. That's not my thing, but I love authentic food of all kinds. And, the more new it is, the better it is for me. So I pursue it with such a passion that I think it drives people around me crazy, even if they occasionally will participate in it with me. But I'll do things like when we went to China for 2 weeks, my husband and I, and we walked around. It was one of the coldest winters in Beijing, and we walked around places where there was no public transport. We sat in places which didn't have heating just to try something new. Did a lot of hand gestures and tried to find out directions just so we could get to that new place. I did similar things. I went to Brazil for a work trip, and I immediately made friends with the one person who I knew loved food like me. And she said, okay, we have a fancy dinner tonight, but I know you're not going to like that. So she took me to a food court in Brazil that had food from all the different local regional cuisines. And so we sat around sampling that. So I'm completely passionately devoted to food. And the late and great Anthony Bourdain was one of my heroes, basically. So that would be something that's different about me.
I have to ask this. What would be a good example of a pretentious food that you did not like? And we have to compare notes about Beijing and Brasilia. But yeah, did you encounter any pretentious food there?
So I'm going to say something very controversial, which I think which you probably don't mind me saying on your show, which is, so if you live in DC, you know this restaurant called Rasika, right? And everybody talks about Rasika. It's this Indian restaurant. It's very fancy. The food is very good. But the thing that drives me nuts is that they sell this thing that everybody loves, which is a common street food in India, which is like a fried spinach snack, and you get it in India for what would be the equivalent of few cents here, like a quarter or something. And it's this extremely dressed up, fancified food. So on the one hand, I appreciate that people get to know about it, but I just hate the whole drama surrounding it in this particular restaurant. So that's the kind of thing that would drive me nuts.
So what is the most what is the most exotic food that you have ever tried?
So this is not exotic to me because it is eaten where I come from, but I ate it in a different version in Shanghai, which was a fish head, which was just basically cooked and surrounded in a bed of chilies. And it was I love fish head because we eat it in my part of India, but it would be very exotic to most people. In fact, it was on Christmas Day, and my husband and I, many, many years ago, and my husband and I took pictures and sent it to his fairly conservative parents who are not adventurous with food at all, because they sent us pictures of their turkey, and we said, this is what we are eating. So that would be something that was cool that I ate.
Anora, you were nodding along when you were talking about fish head.
I know, and you have to use 2 different colors of chili. I think it's made it last week, so I'm not saying it's exotic. It's delicious though.
And now let's go to our final segment, the Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
In my left hand, I have a series of questions. Now, when we're together, we have an actual hat, and in the actual hat, there are actual questions, and we pull an actual question out of the actual hat, and we ask that question. But because we are not together in the same room, I have a list of questions, and they are numbered from 1 to 25, and you please choose a number, and I will read the question that corresponds with that number.
I'm going to go with 18.
18. Okay. We haven't had this question in a while. What is the accomplishment that you are most proud of?
So I would have to say that is all the work that I've done on diversity, not just as part of the ABA, but also in every place that I've worked at. As I've explained, economics is not a field that's been very open to thinking about diversity traditionally. And it's involved some fairly difficult conversations where it's a very personal thing, and going up to people who are basically your bosses or managers and talking to them about something that's very personal and having them explain to you at first that no, it's actually your problem that you don't belong, is a very difficult thing to do. And I've had to, have those setbacks and then learn from them and still somehow stay, committed to it and adapt and have those conversations in a different way the next time. And I have to, whenever I've left workplaces or done something and then, handed it over to somebody else, I've always got people saying, we really appreciated that you did that. Or, you left, but, I wanted to let you know a year later, something changed. And so that's been good for me to hear that it has had an impact.
How do you get other people to have those kinds of conversations?
I build coalitions. It's usually very small at first because of, again, the issues where this has not been traditionally an issue that people have cared about. But I find people who care about it. And also, I will say, the fact that I really love my day-to-day job and I'm decently good at it helps me because I have that capital inside the workplace where people want to ultimately, work with me and keep me happy. And also they know that I'm not just somebody who's making trouble. I'm giving to the institution in other ways. And so they are willing to accommodate because I'm otherwise a good citizen of the workplace. And I also build these coalitions and, try to make the conversations as productive as possible.
All right, well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.